Welcome back to the One Soccer Nation podcast. I'm your host, Kareem Ray. Today, we're joined by Mark Dillon, CEO of the Talentprojekt, a platform focused on bridging one of the most overlooked gaps in global soccer, the development difference between American players and their European counterparts. Mark brings decades of experience placing players into elite environments, and today's conversation goes deeper into the infrastructure behind player development, the business of talent, and why this may be one of the most underappreciated opportunities in the game today. Mark, thank you so much for taking the time. How are you doing?
Pleasure to be here, Kareem.
Thank you. So to start off, I want to ask you one of my favorite questions, and that is, how did you get involved in the beautiful game?
In the game?
In the beautiful game.
Yeah, the beautiful game. It is indeed. I grew up in San Francisco. We've had a semi-pro league there since 1904, so it's a big international city. I just started playing as a kid, and I fell in love with it from the very first time I played. So I've been doing it ever since, my entire life.
That's amazing. I truly appreciate that. I appreciate the connection to soccer because everything I've done in my life too has just been connected back to soccer. I mean, when you look back, what would you say is that thing that made you fall in love with the game? To just stay involved with it your entire life?
Well, that's interesting, Kareem, because I'll be honest with you, it was like an epiphany for me. I started playing, and I realized that I didn't choose soccer; soccer chose me. And it was like it was like I was receiving a divine message. This is your life ahead of you, so get used to it.
That's amazing, Mark. When American players arrive in Europe for the first time, what are the biggest gaps you consistently see compared to players coming through academies in places like Germany, England, or the Netherlands?
Well, number one, the bar is set a lot higher over in Europe. For example, in Europe, the game is faster, the physical demands are higher, the technical demands are higher, and the tactical demands are much higher. Players come in, and we have some really good players come in. I've seen some really good players come in, and players that you might in the United States say, like, this is a slam dunk, this is a top level player, right? And he gets in, and in 4 or 5 days they crash and burn. I've seen other ones make it, have really high levels of success. There's an awful lot of things that conspire against talent when they're trying to make that jump across the Atlantic. You have jet lag, you have the difference of the type of play, the speed of play, a new language, a new culture, different kind of food, different weather conditions. And it takes a little bit of time to make that leap. And most players don't really. I think impatience kind of rears its ugly head when you're dealing with American players getting in there, because a lot of them just think, I didn't think it was going to be this hard. Now, they have some of them have a blast. They just love it if they have the time in order to do that. But, when they come in and they say, listen, I've got to get a trial with Leverkusen or Bayern Munich or Dortmund or something like that, they don't realize that they're jumping into the deep end, really into the deep end, and the water's full of sharks. And sometimes that leap is too much. It's too much too quickly. And it's really one of the things that, Kareem, that motivated me to do the Talentprojekt, because what we want to do is we want to take the negatives off the table, the things that cause them to derail early on, the language problem, the food problem, the weather problem, jet lag problem, missing home problem, all these things. And we want to give them an environment where they can gradually assimilate over a period of time into the system, develop the cultural agility that's necessary, and then give their talent the best opportunity to shine.
Understood. What separates the players that don't do too well versus the players that come into your program and do extremely well? What's the big difference?
A lot of it has to do with attitude, mental, the mindset. A lot of players come in and they may struggle a little bit at first, but they have a single-minded purpose for being there in the first place. And the first things that we do when we bring players in preseason is we say, you've got to identify your why. Why are you here? And when you can identify that, and most of the time the right answer is because I want to get really good at something. I want to be the best I could possibly be. And when they can answer that question affirmatively, then the growing pains, the assimilation pains, in the very beginning that they will inevitably run into, the homesickness pains. These are things that they can mitigate, they can push through. and they develop a certain level of resilience and grit. And if you don't have resilience and grit, I don't care how talented you are, you're not going to make it because you're going to crash and burn.
The Like, it's so interesting. Being talented on the field is just one aspect of the game versus mentality, attitude, mental toughness. You just said it. If you don't have capacity mentally to sustain yourself, to compete, as well as be able to take care of yourself off the field, I mean, that kills what's going on the field. So, I mean, it just reminds me of how important that is, because it's not an easy thing to do at all. When players come to you, Mark, what are some of the keys that you inject into their mental about positive attitude, about getting through the tough times? What are some of the things that you're saying to these players to help them continue to grow?
Yeah, that's a great question. One of our mottos here is trust the process, because it is a process and nothing happens overnight. You know, they have to learn the language, they have to learn the culture, they have to make the other adjustments that I just mentioned as well. But there is a process involved, and it goes day by day, week by week, month by month. And they may not get it right off the bat. And you know what I've seen with American players after many years is that in general, when you get them somewhere, there's somewhere between 3 and 5 months where all of a sudden something clicks and you see a transformation start to really happen. Their body language changes, their decision making changes, their fitness level from training twice a day and playing some really intense matches week by week. All of a sudden, starts to click together. They all starts to aggregate together. Their technical understanding goes up to another level, and you need that time. It never happens. It never happens quickly. Sometimes you get really super talented boys. You say this is something that we can really work with, but they all need that adjustment period. And when they trust the process, then they can develop a certain resistance to setbacks, and they all have setbacks. They're all gonna have time when they're homesick. They're all gonna have periods when they're thinking, "Oh my god, I'm missing home. I'm missing my school. I'm missing my friends. I'm missing my family." And it's that's inescapable in any type of residential facility. It doesn't matter if you're at La Masia in Barcelona, or you're at Liverpool, or you're at FC Bayern, or any club. You could be in the best club in the world, but when you're a young player that has been relocated to another place away from family, you're gonna have problems. And you need really good people around you, which we do, but you also the most important thing is that you need time, and with time, they gradually make that adjustment.
Absolutely. I truly recommend parents and players listening in to this episode that going overseas is truly a blessing. The reason I could say that is because 2018, I went down to the UK. 2019, I went to France. Trying to go
Mhm.
pro. Everything that you just shared, I've went through personally. That builds a different type of character, a different type of human. And if you're able to go through some of those hardest times in your life, then everything else after that will become easier. So to hear, Mark, you say that having the support system outside of home is extremely important. Um, and if players are able to get through to the other side, everything else after that is easy. And the reason I can say that is because I've truly been through that. Understand, being in France, not being able to speak the language, not being around family and friends, missing out. We have phones now; we're able to see what everyone's doing, missing out on parties, events, things that you have to truly sacrifice in order to achieve that dream. And even though for myself, I didn't get a chance, I didn't get get to the highest level I wanted to. That's okay, because the things that I've learned, the things that I had experienced overseas were extremely valuable, and it applies to the skills that I'm applying today in my daily life. So again, I truly recommend these programs, especially Mark, to go ahead and experience another country, a different language, a different experience, a different environment. And that leads me to our next question. How much of the gap is technical on the field versus environmental?
Well, there's technique and there's technical speed, and then you have the difference between technique and skill. And skill is gonna involve, resistance from opponents. It's gonna involve decision makings, because you can find thousands of players that can execute a perhaps it's a shooting exercise. They're receiving a ball that's laid back to them, and they're hitting it from somewhere outside the 18, right? And then maybe they're banging it in the corner 8 out of 10 times. You think, wow, that's fantastic shooting technique. Well, the problem is the match; they never get that shot. because it's the skill level that's missing. It's that judgment and decision that gets into them into that spot that's missing. So that the technique has to be married to how it's executed with the opposition and in a situation where you have to make decisions based on that.
So, coming off the field, why did you like Mark, you're American. Why did you choose to go over to Europe? Why did you choose Germany specifically?
Well, that's an excellent question. Number one is let me get to the back end of your question first. Germany is really low hanging fruit for Americans because the German and the American government have a labor agreement basically that creates very easy access, and it has nothing to do with football. Okay, it creates easy access for skilled Americans to get work visas, work permits in Germany if they get a contract offer for work for a skill permit. So Germany is the only country that gives Americans that privilege. In the UK, you have that's one of the hardest of all. In Belgium and in the Netherlands, you have a minimum salary requirement, which is really high, which means they're saying that you better be good enough to get a salary this high in order to take one of our locals' jobs away from us. You have foreign player quotas in Portugal and Spain. So most of Europe is a little bit closed off. It's not impossible to get in. I'm not saying that, but it's a lot harder. Whereas in Germany, it's the low-hanging fruit. There's about 70 Americans in Germany right now playing. So, and I think the assimilation of life over here is I think it's a lot easier to assimilate into as well, other than the language.
So, and then how did you come across Germany? How did that
Well,
opportunity come across?
well, I was doing some work with Bayer Leverkusen. You know, I was the head coach of the Orlando Lions back in the '90s, and Bayer Leverkusen came over to do a winter training camp, so I helped them with all the organization, and I developed relationships with their executive team and their technical team. And it was very successful. They came back another year, and then they started employing me for a number of things, both in the United States and in Germany, into player identification. They send me after looking after some players that they might be interested in, medical health, specialty medical health for some of their players. And then we did about 5 of their training camps. Then they started bringing me into Germany, and we developed a trust level. When they needed something, they trusted me for it, and so that relationship really lasted about 9 years. Where I was going, so that basically opened up Germany because through Leverkusen, you know, a club like that at the very highest level, you're meeting all kinds of people. And what I realized through those experiences that their young player development is absolutely world class. The level that their coaches are trained is world class. It's not just about teaching football. It's about how they're raising young people, and they're really, really good at it. So they take into account emotional factors, growth factors, and everything that a young player could be going through, and in terms of identifying what the talent potential is. And so they're not necessarily looking for the finished product. They're looking for a potential in the player that could be the finished product. And so they're how they evaluate and how they teach and how they educate young players is really, really at a top level. And and so when I compare that data wise to education in the United States. And I have to say, we've got some really good people in the United States, really good coaches, really good systems and things like that, but you cannot replicate Europe. And when you're talking about Europe at the highest levels where these top clubs exist, and there's a filter down effect to even the clubs that go below them, the education is and the learning is so accelerated. So when you can pack in a year in Europe that might be like 3 years in the United States, you're developing a player at a much younger age that could have, you know, I like to allude it to soccer years, because you could be 18 years old, but in soccer years you could be 21, or you could be 18 years old and in soccer years you could be 15. And so the whole idea is to accelerate the learning, accelerate the development, accelerate the understanding of the game, accelerate their ability to manage themselves and be accountable to themselves in a very professional way. And you can develop players that are soccer wise older than their chronological years.
Absolutely. Age is something that we can't reverse. So players' time is truly dictated by their age and that opportunity gap. Because I believe that clubs stop looking at players at certain ages, right? You have to be at a certain point at a certain age to get in. So it's very time sensitive, um, which is unfortunate but very important to clubs.
You don't get it back. I
Yeah.
think there's a high performance window that I know it could vary a little bit, but let's assume that it's your technical base is much younger, but your high performance base, your professional potential DNA is really going to develop between 14 and 18, somewhere in that window. And if you lose that, you don't get it back. That's gone. And so it doesn't mean you can't be a good player. And I'm not saying there's certainly examples of players out there that couldn't find that window, and yet they develop later on, maybe in many cases much later on, but they could develop it, but it's a lot harder to do, and it really puts them at a disadvantage. So getting into Europe as early as possible is really, really key, or into that sort of environment. And I want to add that there was resistance. The talent project failed the first 7 years trying to get off the ground because there was too much resistance to the whole idea of players needing to get into Europe. And so, I could get players over for a couple of weeks at a time. I'd introduce them to clubs, but it was a limited experience. But what we saw is that the players would come out of that with a very, very clear comparative data. They could say, now I know why they're better. I've had this experience. I've been here for a couple of weeks. Imagine if I could be there for a full year or 2 years or 3 years. Now they know, they got a really clear idea about that. But the idea of having a extended period of living in Germany over let's say over the course of a school year was foreign to everybody.
I mean, that's what we're seeing on the pitch today on the US men's national team is a lot of the talent is European production. Um, it's not American, barely. So to what you're saying, the sooner that a player can get to Europe, the better it is for them for their development. And it's not an easy thing to do, but with a program like yours, you enable more players the opportunity to do so.
Well, we create a very professional learning environment where the players, they train twice a day. We just had our 57th match. Yes, we're in April. We've had 57 matches since August. And, I speak to some coaches and coaching directors in the United States and really good clubs. And these are really, really good people. And they might say, listen, we might get 7 or 8 really good matches until we get to the national playoffs. And until we get to the national playoffs, we have a schedule that's varied, and it's, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not so good. So, so we have that advantage. Is not only that, they learn the language every day, and that's really critical. And I tell our players when they come in, don't tell me you're serious about an opportunity if you're not willing to learn the language, because that's part of what they have to do in order, because a trial can be a very high pressure situation. If they're afforded the opportunity of a trial, you got to walk into a dressing room and got to know how to act. You got to know how to communicate with the players, and the coaches over there. If they're trying to make a decision, is this a good enough player for us? If you don't speak the language, they're taking the risk that you're not going to understand your instructions on the field. You're not going to be able to communicate properly with your teammates. You may become socially isolated. And all these things are what we put into the category of risk on taking this player. Now, I can give you a perfect example of this. I had one player, and I don't want to name him because I don't want to cause any embarrassment, but he was in the under 17 national team, and he came in, and he had been in MLS. He went from residency, and he'd been in MLS for a couple of years, and by this time he was 22. And I got someone asked me for a favor to help him out, and I knew this guy was a good player. And so I said, get over to Germany. We start training, start getting over jet lag, and we'll see what door might open for you. Okay. And so I got a call about the 8th or 9th day that he was in Germany, and I said, this club is looking for this type of position. Do you want to bring him and introduce him? Well, the club was Schalke. And the opportunity there was a jump to their under 23 team, was their second team, where he might be making 15 or 20,000 a month. So that's a pretty good jump from what he was doing at that time. But you're also working with one of the biggest clubs in Europe. It's a huge club. And so I said, you got to get some of the language down. And he said, yeah, I know. So I went out to training and I watched the training with him, and he had a good session. He did good. And a couple of the people that were watching, and there was, even that level, there's a number of people just watching training. They said, this American boy's not bad. And so I brought him again. But after the training session, he went in and got a shower. He came out and he said, I said, hey, how'd you like it? He said, oh, man, I loved it, man. What a level, what a place this is. I said, did you try to speak any of the language to them? He says, no, 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 I just made them speak English. They were okay with that. I said, yeah, I think that's a bad idea. You're going to have to try to speak a little bit of German tomorrow, just a few words, but show them that you're trying. Second day they came out, and he also had a good session. And I thought this is really interesting. I think there's maybe a shot here. And so the coach comes up to me after training and he says, I like your boy, and he is 99% the solution we're looking for. I said, okay, somehow I think that 1% is looming large in the background. Okay, what's the deal? He said, he never tried to speak any German. I said, so you're going to turn him away for that? And he says, yes, because we don't want to take the risk on it. I use that anecdotally to speak to our players that if they're really, really serious, and our guys are getting spotted. If you're in our area, if you're good enough, everyone in 300 miles knows who you are. And scouts come to the match, and a lot of times at the clubs that we play, the opposing coaches are also serving as scouts looking for players. So we've had over 100 pro trials for our guys, and but the first thing they want to know is, can this player do it? Can this player adjust? Is he going to get homesick and go home if we sign him? We're taking a risk on that. So tell me how we can mitigate those risks. The biggest way to do that is show that you're adjusted to the culture and you're able to have a working knowledge of the language.
I do got to say, I've heard that learning Germany is extremely hard.
Yeah, it's not an easy language. It's right up there with Mandarin or something like that.
But that's an amazing story. It does show that a player needs to show interest in the culture and language that the country that they're in, for sure. It shows respect. It shows that they're trying. It's extremely important. Let's break down the talent project. What exactly are you building, and how does it replicate what a top European academy provides on a daily basis?
Well, for starters, in 2009, FIFA made they passed what they call Regulation 19, and it basically says that if you're under the age of 18, you cannot do an international transfer, which means that anybody really outside of the European Union cannot transfer into Europe, regardless of what their talent level is. A couple of exceptions are if the player's parents are living in the country for something that's completely unrelated to football, they would grant an exception to that. But let's assume we had a 15-year-old Leo Messi in someplace in the United States, and everybody knows this kid is a genius, and all the big clubs want him. Madrid wants him, Barca wants him, FC Bayern wants him, Liverpool wants, so on and so forth. He can't get into Europe. Okay, he loses that window, and the club have to say, "Listen, we love this player, we just can't sign him because it's against FIFA law." And it's important to note that if there's a violation of this law, the academy doesn't suffer. The first team suffers. And so the first guys on the first team says, you better not break any laws because you're going to make us suffer for it. You'll freeze us out of transfer windows, or we pay onerous fines, or both. So the Talent Project was created as I don't like to use the word end around but it is kind of an end around in a sense. We are a study abroad program. So I can get American players in, or players actually from anywhere in the world in, on a student visa. They're not allowed to register as official players. They're not allowed to play in a league. But we have a complete environment. We have a Bundesliga academy environment here. So we train twice a day. We play the matches, we learn the language, we learn the culture, and we do everything that they're doing at the academy at Salzburg or Bayern Munich or Dortmund or any place else. Okay, the only caveat being is that they cannot sign. But this allows me to take an American player and say, you don't have to wait until you're 18 to start learning and developing in the European system. I can bring you over there now. Okay. And so that's kind of what the genesis of this project was about. Now we're just about to finish our 7th year. And I think that one of the things that we have proven in this environment is that the American players can adapt. They can improve. Some are working harder than others, but sometimes we see extraordinary results from the players that jump in with both feet. And they answer that initial question that I asked in the very beginning, why are you here? And they know exactly why they're here. They're focused. I have a goal and I'm going to throw myself into this at 100%. These kids are going to respond and they're getting advantages. And then they could say, okay, what are my guys doing back at home? Okay, we have a shorter season. We're not training as much. We don't have all the players aren't as motivated as all the guys that are in this program here. Some are, but I mean, there are, but there's an inconsistency there, and there's an inconsistency in the schedule. And sometimes you got to get in vans and drive 8 hours to play a league game, or get on an airplane to play a league game. And everything is spread out so much, so that comparative understanding between home and what they have in Europe is stark enough for them to say, and clear enough for them to say, this is the environment this is the advantages I'm getting by being here.
Understood. Can you walk us through the full experience, including training, competition, housing, education, and overall structure of the Talent Project?
Well, we're in southern Bavaria. We're right between Munich and Salzburg, Austria. So we're at the base of the Alps. We're in a phenomenal, beautiful location. And we're on a former U.S. military base. The military were here it was a U.S. Center of Excellence for Intelligence. So we had the NSA here, we had the CIA here, and we had the U.S. Army here. And they were there for 62 years. And so like many of the bases, the U.S. government downsized their military footprint in Europe to some extent. This is one of the bases that closes. So all the infrastructure was here. We had the dining hall, we had the school, we have the living accommodations, and we have sports facilities, which we're continuing to improve. So it's all here. So we have everything that the players need. So we have been able to create, and I want to emphasize also, we share this campus with an organization, a very successful organization that's been doing this now in a residential situation for over 15 years and have had enormous success. So we have like a United Nations of football. We have 18 languages spoken on campus and a lot of really good players here. And we have South Africans and we have Australians and we have Eastern Europeans. We have Asians. And so the Americans we have our own cohort. We have our own coaching staff, our own schedule of matches. We have our own training schedule. We have our own class schedule. But the rest of the time, we're on this beautiful football environment where they get to meet guys from all over the world and share ideas. We have little rivalry matches on campus and things like that. So it's a really good place for players to learn and to develop. And it's a very safe place besides that. There's no concern about crime and some of the things that could be unsavory in some other locations.
Understood. Thank you for sharing. One of the goals you mentioned is to close that development gap within roughly a year. What specifically allows that acceleration to happen?
Well, part of it's volume, and part of them is raising expectations, level of expectations. You know, if you're not doing it fast enough, you got to get fast enough. We got to show them how to get faster. A lot of the time it's just a lot of times we spend correcting basic habits, and you have to get the basics right before, the use of the eyes, your communication skills, your verbal skills on the field. And in addition to those other intangibles that we talked about earlier, but that needs to be done on a daily basis. And if you look at the overall training volume that they're used to, and then we go from, they might go from 4 sessions a week. We have 8 to 10. And then we have a match, or maybe sometimes we have 2 matches. So the sheer volume of that, and then you have a coaching staff that really understands what professional standards are and professional expectations are, and we try to guide them patiently towards what those standards are, but they have to see what those standards are before they can reach for them. And until they really realize what it takes, what their counterparts at Bayern are doing, yeah, or one of the top Bundesliga clubs or something like that, when they see how good they are, then they can say, okay, that's the level I've got to get to. And until they're exposed to that on a regular basis, they don't know.
What you said right there, that last thing, that they don't know, you don't know what you don't know. And that consistency is extremely important, because I grew up here in Canada playing in North America.
Mhm.
And, North North America, we're still growing. I don't like to say, I try not to say we're behind Europe. I like to say we're still growing, right?
We
So
are. We are getting better and better too.
US is way further than Canada by far, more infrastructure, more capital, more clubs. Canada, we just launched our first professional league in 2019, the Canadian Premier League. So it's been alive for about 7 years now. So it's growing. MLS has been around for 30 plus years. And then Europe, if we're looking towards EPL, it's been around for 100 plus years. North America, we got a lot of growing pains to go through. With saying that, going back to when I went to England in 2018, which I thought was an amazing experience to see the culture, the true football culture, um, going like when aside from playing, going outside, the restaurants, football always being played on TV, going to a match, going to matches, watching the second teams play, seeing thousands of fans there just at a second team level, going to see Arsenal and Everton play. We're talking about 20,000 plus fans in the stadium, not even sitting down for the game, right? We were standing up the entire, I believe, 90 minutes of the game. Anytime we had a little moment to sit down, the ball would come back to our side. We're back up. At a certain point, we just stood up for the rest of the game. So the energy, the culture is amazing. It's completely different. And you only get that opportunity to experience it by going to these countries. Now, coming to the football side, being on the pitch, I thought England was pretty cool. The reason why is because if we're talking about playing on grass, it's always rainy, so you're playing in mud. So at that, we didn't have six studs. We had our cleats, so we were slipping and sliding during some games. But talk about talent, talk about players being able to manipulate the ball under control in the weather, in that weather, and wet, muddy grass, the rain. That takes talent, right? That's different type of football versus, and when I went to France, um, I was shocked. I thought they played more so like on the ground, I think more so like Spain. I haven't been to say Spain, but I've watched a lot of Barcelona. A lot of Barcelona's ball on the ground, tiki taka, 1-2s. But in France was completely different, where I was shocked because I thought it was going to be like Spain. First time walking into training session with a fifth division club, and I'm walking into the change room and I'm looking at the field, watching these players play. I'm seeing touches on the ground, quality control, a nice ping, player chest into the direction that they're going, and then one touch, they're out of there. And then the third touch on the ball is playing a ball across the box into the net, a golazo. I was like, whoa. I was caught off guard because I didn't know the type of football that they played in France. And then I respected football in France way more than football in England because of the technical ability and just the talent that they have in France is on another level. England is still up there, but France has caught me off guard.
I would agree with that, Kareem. I think France has probably the fastest and most technical players in Europe, without a doubt. Now there are other areas that that the Germans might eclipse them in, or the toughness of the English players, and in Spain, of course, they're very very technical there as well. But France has got some really really good young players, without a doubt. But all over Europe, they're good. The Dutch, you go to these youth games. I mean, the level is just so unbelievably high, and there's so many of them. And you think that we talk about 1% of the guys are really going to make it to the top, but that second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, 10% are really, really good players. And they just don't get the luck or whatever it is. Maybe that tiny, tiny little bit of difference between them and the guy that gets that big contract. But there's so many really, really good players all across Europe. And it's really exciting for our guys to be able to experience that.
And so the reason why I share that story is because I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned a great point, that consistency, being in the environment, being able to experience it. So I wanted to ask you, what is the talent and what's the talent pool like in Germany? What does football look like in Germany?
Oh, it's really, you got good clubs everywhere, great facilities everywhere. I think Germany, their organization is the best in Europe, without a doubt. I mean, they're from the federation all the way down to the local clubs, the state regional clubs, and things like that. And their pyramid is really solid, and they have an unbelievably solid bottom of the pyramid, that their grassroots that grows all the way up. So Germany is really, from an organizational standpoint, I think it's the best in Europe. And so we talk about talent, and that was your question. First of all, what I've grown to really fully understand over the years is that talent, just the word talent, is the most misunderstood word in all of sports, and it's also the most overvalued word in all of sports because we don't know what talent is. Nobody knows. I mean, no, you look at a 15-year-old player and you think, oh my God, he's just oozing with talent, and he's going right to the top, right? He'll be a millionaire in 3 years. And you see some other kid who's 15 years old and he's kind of floating around the middle of the pack. He's grinding. He's good, but he's nothing exceptional about that. And then you come back to the same pitch 3 years later, and that superstar is gone. He's just fallen out entirely. He hasn't fulfilled all that unbelievable talent. And yet you see the middle of the road player that was grinding away. He had the potential. It just hadn't emerged yet for whatever reason. And a lot of, and that's and over in Germany they recognize that. They call it the second wave, actually, because they say, listen, we've missed too many good players because we've tried to peg their talent level to performance rather than their talent level to potential. And so now they're taken, and I said, as a statement made earlier on, I think that the German the coaching system, from an educational standpoint, is the best in Europe. And the coaches have to work like hell to get those advanced licenses. Part of what they're doing as they're developing these licenses is the ability to spot potential in players that may not have emerged yet because their superstar might just be out there and, oh, we got to win Saturday afternoon, so they throw him on the bench and he gets 10 minutes here and there, or something like that, or he gets passed over to, you're not going to be good enough for this team now, out you go. And I can tell you a really good anecdotal story about how they spot stuff like that, because the first talent project coach had been at Fortuna Dusseldorf in the Rhineland there, which is Leverkusen, Dortmund, and Schalke, and all these. It's probably one of the most concentrated areas of professional football in all of Europe. Okay, he's at Fortuna Dusseldorf, at the Bundesliga club, and right in the heart of all that. And he was coaching an under 15 team there for Fortuna, and he had a player there that was trying to get out of the back, trying to make these line breaking passes, but they were always falling short. And he's watched him do it again, and he passed again. Again, the pass fell short. He passed again. Again, the pass fell short. So he was just about to tell the kid, no more of those passes. You're giving the ball away too much. Okay, so he started to step onto the field and stop him. The coaching director was standing right next to him and said, "Don't say a word. He's made the right decision. We're looking at his decision making, not at the pass itself." Okay, so he said, "Okay, I'm going to back off. I'm just let him keep on doing this." Well, this is how the story ends. No, it doesn't end there, but this is the next chapter of that story. 2 years later, they're watching the German national team against France play, and that same player was coming out of the back for the German national team. Germany won against France 2-0 by this kid sliding the exact same pass to Kai Havertz. And of course, Kai's a superstar now, of course, but that could have been coached out of that kid at 14 years old. And this is what they're trying to avoid is understanding that the potential for the player can easily be misunderstood and completely taken away from him, and then he never develops as a player.
So that's a great story to show how impactful coaches are and influential they are on a player and what it could do to their growth. It gives me flashbacks. The question I want to ask you is, for coaches listening in, what advice would you give to them? I mean, that's just great advice. I mean, that's a great story right there. But what's some key advice that you would share with them to have a successful coaching career?
Well, that's a hard question because, first of all, particularly in America, coaches are under an awful lot of pressure to succeed now. And more often than not, they're judged by the results of the win-loss column, or are they winning this tournament? Are they getting to the late rounds of this tournament and things like that? And if they're in a situation where their job depends on getting those results, they may very well say, I'm not interested in potential. I got to get the results now. But that's also that's also ingrained in our sports system here in the United States. I think that's the biggest mistake. If you get into a club, and I think there's a few really good ones in the U.S. now, particularly in some of the MLS academies, where they say, be focused on. Let's not focus on the short-term success of the team. Let's focus on the performance of the players. What are they learning? What sort of decisions are they making on the field? And because that they can take on to the next level. But if it's a case of saying, okay, we've got to win an under 15 tournament this week, it's absolutely critical. What are you going to do? The formula for that, if you want to be successful, is really, really simple. You get a kid that's overdeveloped and you put him in the middle of your defense, and you get a kid that's overly developed and you put him in the center of your attack, and you're probably going to win more games than you're going to lose just on those two things alone. And so that's why the youth development, particularly for high performance and professional development, it's a real serious business. And you need to have people that are focused on what the long-term results are, and you have to have an organization to tell the coach we're not focused on the short-term results. And he has to have the security of knowing that he's going to have the backing of the people above him. So that's a hard one. It's a hard one to find. It's a hard
Yeah,
one to find.
no, truly, top down. You have to have full support. Um, oh, I'm very curious to ask you about this. I'm interested to know the story. What was the light bulb switch for you to say, "Hey, I want to create my own program, talent project, and actually do it?" Because there's a lot of people that have ideas of what they want to create in the beautiful game, but don't execute on it. What was that moment for you that sparked?
Well, I've got a long history of starting new projects, including uh, you know, 3 professional clubs in America, where there was in one where there was no professional league even to play in. And so I don't mind taking those risks, and I'm probably a little bit, I don't know, maybe I'm not quite right. Anyway, it came over time because, as it really started in, um, fairly deep involvement in European football with top level clubs in the early 90s. And as I spend more and more time there, I worked with Ajax for 3 years, and so I was going back and forth to see their system, which many people consider the gold standard for young player development in the world. And then I come back and I'd be working in the United States, and I think, my God, the gulf is so big. And so I said, well, and then when FIFA, because I brought over some players for Leverkusen, I brought Landon Donovan. I was working on the management side of that, not the player side, but so I brought him in. I brought Bobby Wood in and players like that, and they had free access to Europe prior to the FIFA Regulation 19. So when that changed, Americans had no chance. Americans had no chance. They could not get in, and they were more or less resigned to the best that the American system could offer them. And, I know there's really good people, very sincere people, hardworking people, and talented people, but I think most people will admit the system has its deficiencies, and we still can't compare to what their counterpart is getting over in Europe. So I was looking for a way to to be able to get players in on a long-term basis. And so, as I described earlier on, the Talent Project was created simply as a means to get players into the European system at ages they were otherwise restricted.
Understood. Switching gears, there's a lot of debate around pay to play in the United States,
Mhm.
but you've taken a more nuanced stance. What does the industry get wrong about that conversation?
Well, that's a big debate. First of all, I agree with the concept. I mean, I agree with the concept that if we didn't have pay to play, the game would be more accessible to more players. And I know what a strain it can put on just playing for a local team, community team. I mean, it's sometimes it can be hard, but if you're going to make that statement, then tell me what your solution is. Because if you don't have a solution for that, and it's just another complaint. But if good coaches, they need to be paid unless they say, okay, well, I don't believe in pay to play, so I'm going to give 30 hours a week to this club and just good, do that. And the city says you can have the facilities for free, and the local restaurant will pay for your uniforms, then you're gonna have free football, and I think that'd be great. Or we rely on the schools, and then of course it's not free because taxpayers are paying for it. But there is no such thing as free soccer. I mean, there's just not. Somebody's paying somewhere, whether it's MLS or at Bayern Munich. But and this really gets down to the nuts of why it's so hard to make it in Europe. Because if you look at a Bundesliga club, the club is going to make a decision that to educate one player in their academy is going to run anywhere from $60 to $120,000. So they're going to make a very big financial commitment, or even at MLS, it's probably somewhere $50 to $75,000 a year for one player. And you imagine you have an entire academy. They're making really, really big investment, but somebody's paying that. It's not free. And so as we talk about, okay, what are the solutions for, I don't know, to be honest with you, I don't know of any players really, to be honest with you, that we're told they can't play because they can't afford it. Maybe at a lower level, but if a player is really top level, we'll always find a way to get them in. But you asked a really, really good question, and that's a raging debate. Jurgen Klopp on an interview recently, and he's working for Red Bull now. And of course, I have just a world of admiration for that guy. And he was over here and visiting Red Bull New York, and he was saying, "Wow, what great facilities we got! And there's some talented young players and everything else like that. But your pay-to-play model is holding you back." I said, "Well, great, Jurgen. What do you know about our culture? Why don't you get Red Bull can write a few $1 million check and nobody has to pay anymore? But it is what it is." So I think that if we could find solutions to that, I think we probably would have a better game in the United States, but we don't. So
Yeah, it's definitely one of the big topics in the US. Um, One of the biggest challenges in the US system is the lack of clarity for families. Why is it so difficult today for parents to identify the right development pathway for their child?
well, I'm a parent, and I always wanted the best opportunity for my kids. And a kid, if you have parents that says their child, their daughter, their son is showing an enormous aptitude towards something, and they show the desire, they show the commitment to being at their best. I don't know too many parents that aren't going to do everything possible to try to support that, but you do need a clarity. And in the United States, we got an alphabet soup of leagues, and this one forms, and it's I can't even keep up with it. There's different associations and leagues, and I really think that, and I don't know if there's a solution. I don't have a solution. But I do, in my opinion, that the federation, which has made enormous improvements in the last few years, really needs to spell out with clarity what the options are for. It's certainly within our domestic situation. They can't do anything about the international situation. We can, the Talentprojekt can, and there's other organizations that can say that we can offer you opportunities overseas. But in the United States, really, we really need, I think in baseball, you have a very clear pathway for players, or basketball, or they want to go through. They've evolved over a lot longer period of time. So, but to have a real crystal clear pathway going forward doesn't exist yet. And so what we look for is parents are saying, okay, I'll take the best opportunity possible. Very often that's the team that's got the most success. They think if they're successful, they must be doing things right. Okay. So the problem with that, and then as we discussed or we alluded to earlier on, is that if you're focused only and judging the quality of a program only by their success, it could be an illusion, because a team can be at a youth level, can be very, very successful doing everything wrong. And they pay for that later on. And there's a really good story, that this is hockey, but it was a story about, Wayne Gretzky is, I don't think too many people argued, maybe the greatest hockey player of all time, but he was a youth player, a youth hockey player, and they were in this tournament. They reached the finals of a tournament against this team that everybody feared. It was like they were just killing everybody in Canadian hockey, right? And they played in the tournament, and they ended up losing like 5-2 or something like that. And the other team was doing all the celebration. But Gretzky's dad evidently knew something about hockey, and he said to Wayne, he said, "I'll tell you something. Not a single one of those players are going to make it to the NHL because they're peaked. They're already peaked, and I know why they're winning. They're not that they're those players are not playing good hockey. They're just simply overpowering you. And what happened was, as the years progressed, none of those players made it, but 5 players from Gretzky's team made it to the NHL. And so it was really a case of identifying them doing the right things earlier on and not getting too carried away with, are we winning this tournament or winning this league and things like that. So that's a lesson we can learn, I think, that we need to incorporate into our football culture, soccer culture here.
Absolutely. For someone listening who is interested in the business side, how does the talent project actually work as a business model? Where does the revenue come from, and where's the long-term value created?
Well, I think we can argue that the talent project is really by itself, it's not a business, it's a mission. And so, there's a lot of residential programs out there for. We have some in the United States, and there's others in Europe, and most of those cases, they're the cost of a player being there for a year is about double or more than what it costs to go to the talent project. And the reason that is that we see our work as a mission. So we try to keep our costs as affordable as possible for other people, for as many people as possible to get in. Or we can't just, it costs money to house and feed and educate a young person, a teenager away from home. So we have to get those costs covered, but we keep it really, really low. We don't run this thing as a profit-making business. The business proposition for us comes later, and that is when we develop a player that we can transfer to a professional club who's good enough to merit a transfer later on down the road, then we get to share on the spoils of that thing. So, if you look at players that, for example, Christian Pulisic goes into uh, uh, Dortmund at 16 years old, basically for nothing. Now, the club invested some in relocation. There was some money invested there, but basically they got a player from the United States for nothing who was able to get into that system, and they sold him for 72 million 3 years later. And so that's where the value is. Now, I've seen players. We recently saw a player from Daytona Beach, Florida, who's in high school. They're playing in the UPSL, the fourth league in the United States, and all of a sudden he got spotted, and next thing you know, he's in Spain. He's spotted by a scout from Red Bull Leipzig who paid the Spanish club 22 million to transfer him, and then now he's currently on the market for 100 million. And so there's talent out there. I mean, the real business of young player development is about, one, if you're in a professional club, it's developing assets for the first team so they don't have to buy players from somebody else, homegrown. And secondly, for the transfer market. And the value proposition of that is to take an unknown player with no market value and develop into a star player with high market value. And that's really where the business of youth football is.
Absolutely. Yeah, that the potential is anywhere to a million to 100 million plus of for
There,
the
I
value of
remember
the player.
the Trevor Francis was the first £1 million player, and this is going back into the 70s, wasn't it? And people thought, this is totally insane. This is absolutely insane. Now clubs are paying £1 million, €1 million for a 16-year-old academy kid, 15-year-old academy kid. And if they become big time stars, it could be 60, 70, 80, 100 million. What's his name? Florian Wirtz went for 120 million to at 22 years old from Leverkusen to Liverpool. So the amount of money that's circulating in the game at those levels is insane, and the way to get to those levels of that level of financial reward is to have the best players, so they'll pay for those players. Absolutely.
And again, this is why your program is such an inspiration to me as a builder, as we're building our own platform, and hopefully we get to where you're at one day. Is that opportunity is really exciting, and you're doing it. You're developing that talent and giving those players the opportunity to get paid for to get paid for doing what they love, which is playing football. You mentioned to me, you know, the last time we spoke about opening this up to a broader group of investors. How does that work in practice, and what role can someone play if they want to get involved?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've always believed that the more the merrier. Every once in a while, you come across a high net worth person that loves the game and wants to get involved, and sometimes maybe they donate to their school or their college or the youth club or something like that. But I've always been a believer that if you get more people involved, you create momentum and you create energy. And so we have opened up the talent project for smaller investors to come in and say, like, I want to be part of developing the next generation of American superstars. And I want to be directly involved with that. So, we're very happy to have discussions with people that want that, because it doesn't matter where you are. If you're in a serious academy program, you can't do it without capital. It cannot be done without capital. And so in order for us to explore opportunities either with big high net worth investors, sometimes that comes with caveats that we find distasteful. Having maybe a smaller group of or a larger group of smaller investors creates energy. It helps provide the capital that's necessary to keep costs as low as possible while maintaining a high level of quality and efficiency. And you don't want to sacrifice that. And again, having the more people, everybody knows somebody. So you get somebody that's invested in the program, and maybe they throw 10,000 or 5,000 or a smaller number like that in. It could be a fun investment for somebody. You're not going to lose their house over an investment like that, but they can have some fun doing it, participate in growing a generation of American stars, and but they may also bring other things to the table. They may know the children of of a friend who's really good players, or they may be connected to a business somewhere that may want to put their name on their shirts or put them signs up on the side of the field or something like that. So I just believe it's more fun with more people. You can kind of create a soccer party that way.
Yeah, 100%. Coming towards the end mark, we're seeing more players move into European than ever before. Do you view this as a temporary trend or the beginning of a long-term structural shift?
I think that ultimately we're going to get there in the United States because we do that. That's what we do. We want to be good at it, and we have really good people, and we're investing real money in the game and infrastructure and developing things in the United States. But we're minimally, I think, it's my opinion. Maybe you might argue with it, but I think we're at least a full generation away from that happening. Um, but you can't replicate the glamour of the game in Europe. Go out to a youth game, and where there's, like, say, academy players or high level players, and they're all 14 or 15 years old. They're talking about the game on the weekend that they saw between Arsenal and Man City, or Liverpool against Everton, or Bayern Munich against Leverkusen, or something. They all dream about Europe because that's where the big dreams are. That's the romance. And so, if you go out to a good youth level team and you're speaking to the players and you say, "How many of you guys dream about playing in Europe?" And all the hands come up. You guys want to play in Europe? Yeah, of course I want to play in Europe. That's my dream. That's where I want to go. So I think that's not going to go away anytime soon. I think the appetite for Europe, whether it's the adventure, whether it's the romance, or the glitz and glamour of the game at that level, those are attractions that are really, really hard to ignore. So that's going to be here for a while. But I do hope. I'm an American, and I want Americans, and I'm doing this because I want Americans to play better. I do the talent project because I want to make better Americans, because they're going to bring the game forward, and they're going to create the future, and ultimately they're going to be coaches and or administrators or stakeholders in the game in the United States. So, I want them to have that level of European experience to bring back at some point. But I think that ultimately we're going to get there. I want to see us the MLS and a really good structured minor league and a really good structured college environment kind of take hold gradually. I think it's 20 or so years out at this point.
1,000%. My last question is, looking ahead 5 to 10 years, where do you see a platform like the Talent Project fitting into the global soccer ecosystem?
That's a great question, Kareem. We're on a campus where, okay, let's understand that players under the age of 18 cannot get into the high level clubs in Europe. Okay, that's the grounding principle that stimulates this whole effort. We're on a campus right now where we can take players from any place in the world at ages that they're restricted from Europe. Where in our home, they can Europeanize, they can learn the language, they can learn the systems of play without the pressure and without the restrictions that FIFA has placed on them. So when you think about, okay, we're working with Americans, but we could get players from West Africa, we can get players from Asia, we can get players from South America, in addition to the American players, Canadian players. I have a couple of Canadian players too, and the Caribbean. There's great young players everywhere, and so can we make it? Yeah, I believe we can, because we can do things. We can do things that even the biggest clubs can't do. We can educate them. We can get them in. We can get them into school. We can teach them European habits before they're able to sign with their professional clubs. So that is going to be a big impact. Absolutely.
Amazing. Mark, before we end off, I just got 5 quick rapid questions. The shorter the answer, the better. If you could do it in one word, amazing. Um, but it's going to
Oh,
be a
this is
challenge.
fun.
It's going to be challenging, and it's going to be fun. So the first one is one country producing the most complete players right now outside of
you,
Germany.
you're talking about soccer players, right? Okay. Brazil.
Biggest flaw in the United States development system today.
Emphasis on early competitive results. Sorry, that was a lot of words.
This is a good answer though. Um, One trait every American player must develop to succeed in Europe.
Patience.
Most underrated factor in player development.
Early, putting too much emphasis on talent early on.
And the last one, does the United States become a true global powerhouse in your lifetime?
I hope so. I really, really hope so.
We got to see them win the World Cup and create the next Messi.
Yeah, I think yes. I think Messi's going to emerge from the United States. Ronaldo's going to emerge. Iniesta is going to emerge. So they're out there somewhere. I believe that somewhere on some field, and it could be Iowa, it could be Southern California or Long Island, any place. There are future superstars out on American fields today, and I want to find them. We want to find them, and we want to give them every opportunity to be the best they can be.
Absolutely. Well, Mark, really appreciate you coming on and sharing this level of insight. For everyone tuning in, if you're serious about understanding how the global game actually works, from development to investment, make sure to follow and subscribe to the One Soccer Nation. We'll see you on the next one. Thank you, Mark.
All the best. Thank you. Thank you, Kareem.